So as Nettie was saying, I was asked to talk about Fusarium wilt and anthracnose on top of the Phytophthora talk that I gave last week, I think, just because those are issues that folks maybe have been interested in because of disease things that happened last year. So let's get started. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about Fusarium wilt, and then I'm going to move on to anthracnose. So Fusarium wilt is caused by a pathogen called Fusarium oxysporum forma specialis niveum. So something nice about this pathogen is that it is very host specific. So if you happen to have infested fields, it is something that if you do crop rotation, it can really help with it. It doesn't go to a lot of different crops. It is a soil-borne, so once you get it in your fields, it's gonna be there for a while. So crop rotation is really, really good idea. And something important to note is that this pathogen actually infects early during the growing season, but you will see the symptoms later as it gets warmer. And typically what you're gonna see is that your watermelon plant just suddenly wilts. The infection is not new. Really what happened is that early in the spring, when the temperatures were cooler and you were planting, that's when the plant became infected, but you only see the symptoms later in the season because the pathogen, it starts essentially causing this inflammation almost of the vascular tissues of the plant. So when the plant gets really big and then it's warm, it wilts. And as I was saying, this pathogen can persist for a really long time in your field. It produces a resting spore called a chlamydospore that is quite tough. So there's research showing that it can survive anywhere from 5 to 20 years. And also that fumigation may or may not be effective for that spore, depending on different things like, soil type, the weather, the Fusarium species, all those things. Okay, so just to review a little bit the symptoms, because it can be hard to catch when you're not familiar with it. And in your fields, you will typically see it patchy. It's not like Phytophthora that you would see like swaths of your field just melting. In this case, you would see like one plant, kind of dead or wilting here and there. And this is because it is a soil-borne, so it's going to have sort of like hot spots in certain areas of your field. And then the very, very classical symptom of it is this thing called unilateral wilting, which is, a lot of your watermelon will be looking fine, but then a few vines would just be wilting because of that inflammation of the vascular tissues that I was mentioning. So when you see that, always suspect a Fusarium problem. Another symptom that is obviously harder to catch unless you're just cutting open your plants is there's always vascular discoloration. So this is a pathogen that once it has entered the roots, it starts producing spores that go up the vascular system, and that causes just a discoloration and pigmentation of the tissue. So this kind of thing is pretty indicative of Fusarium, and it could be a way to differentiate from other similar things like a bacterial wilt or something like that. So when talking about this pathogen and dispersal and survival, it's really important to understand that it can come through contaminated seed, and it can come through infected transplants and contaminated farm implements and essentially anything that is moving infested soil. So this is just an example of sometimes pictures that I get sent from growers that I work with. They get some transplants from wherever, and then they start seeing this kind of thing. So when you're seeing this, obviously don't plant it. There's nothing really labeled as far as fungicides to use at the greenhouse level. So it's really important to start clean. Once in the field, we do have a few chemical options that we're going to talk about, but not really in the greenhouse. So that's really important. And another thing that I wanted to mention is, when you're producing your transplants in-house, I have seen these. Sometimes folks have greenhouses where the benches, where the flats lay, are maybe too close to the soil. so that when the roots are growing down, they end up touching that soil. And if maybe in a previous year you had flats that looked like this and you were watering and you have that soil under those benches uncovered, there's a chance that you have essentially put chlamydospores, or like in your greenhouse area. So when you have those benches for transplant production, it's really important that they're high, that there's no way that those roots are going to touch the soil, that there's no way that when you water, soil is going to splash your flats. So, put in like a physical barrier under that. It's a good idea. But just keep that in mind to not introduce that into your planting materials. And as we mentioned before, once you get it into your fields, it can stay there for a long time because of the chlamydospores. So the goal should be to try to not introduce the pathogen if you can. So just some general concepts for disease management. So as I mentioned, using pathogen-free seed and transplants is really important. There are some host-resistant varieties options. So Fusarium wilt has races. There's race 0, 1, 2, and a contested race 3. There is some pretty good commercial resistance out there for race 0 and race 1. Not so much for race 2, but definitely look into it because there's seedless varieties, all sorts of things. So this could be something definitely to explore when you go to your company catalogs. Check out those lines that are available. You can also apply effective fungicides at planting. That can be really helpful. Especially if you have had Fusarium in your field. If you have had Fusarium in your field, you want to be applying a fungicide when you plant. Another thing that really helps is trying to play a little bit with that temperature thing that I was mentioning, that the pathogen likes to infect early in the season in cool weather. So, doing raised beds with black plastic mulch can help increase that soil temperature in the spring and help with infection. So as an example, I wanted to show this. When I do my trials to try to promote disease in my disease nurseries, I use white plastic because I want to keep that soil temperature cool so that I get lots and lots of infection for my fungicide trials. So something as simple as trying to do that can be really helpful, or even delay the planting date a little bit, which I know is tricky because of that 4th of July market, but when possible, that could help. Definitely use a 5-year rotation. I know that's really hard because a lot of watermelon folks are on a much shorter rotation than that, but if you have fields with this pathogen, really consider it. There's some research indicating that some cover crops can help, not dramatically. And as you all know from work that Jonathan Schultes and Frank Lowe's and others have done in NC State, there's also some grafting options that can help with this. That said, grafting can be really expensive. And there's always the concern of like soil getting above that grafted point. So it's something that, it's not for everyone, but definitely something to consider and another option there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fungicides that are available. So a few years ago, we had some good funding to work on this pathogen, so we did a few experiments for it. So this is a trial that we did in 2019. We used a very susceptible variety just to try to really get a lot of disease to test fungicide efficacy. This was done in Clayton. We actually have a disease nursery there, so we are able to inoculate, and we did so with a race 1 isolate. And we let the trial run for about 9 weeks, and this was in raised beds, white plastic mulch like I showed you before, and we used drip irrigation. So at this point, we have 2 products that are labeled for Fusarium wilt control in a watermelon, and those are Proline and a product that is now named Miravis Prime. So I did a lot of confidential work with the active of Miravis Prime, which back then was called adepidine, which is this thing called pidiflumethofen, which is mouthful. So essentially, adepinone is sort of like a proxy for Miravis Prime. But we wanted to evaluate how those two products were performing individually, in combination, and then at different times of application. So the treatments that we have here are mostly each product by itself as a drench application that back then we use as a proxy for drip, just because the label was not like ready yet. And then also in some cases, a follow-up spray every 14 days. And both labels allow for 2 follow-up sprays every 14 days. So we did kind of like a combination of all of those treatments to try to figure out, well, what's given us the most disease control and also yield. So in the darker green, you have your disease incidence, and in your lighter green, you have your marketable yields. And this is just the level and your treatments. And here in the outlined black bars, you have your non-treated. So as you can see here, we had tons of disease. You would hopefully never see this level of disease in your fields, but remember, we inoculated and we were being very aggressive. And these treatments that have the blue outline were really the ones that provided the best disease control and also the better yields. And if you notice, the things that those treatments have in common is that is where we applied proline as a drench at planting. So that really makes a huge difference to apply that product early. If you protect that plant, that seedling, from that window early in the production season where the temperature's cool and the pathogen is going to infect, you are doing yourself a favor. So that's something that we really confirmed, that, you know, regardless of then coming in with Miravis Prime or with Proline itself with some sprays, really that application at planting was really key. And this is just to drive that message home. And remember, we did a dritch, but the label really has more like a drip type application, and that's what you would want to use. So we did another trial combining a little bit fungicide applications, which would also host resistance, because we also wanted to understand, okay, what are the commercial levels of resistance that are out there, and how much are the fungicides bringing to the table on a, you know, susceptible, in this case, black diamond, intermediately resistance, in this case, captivation, and then something considered more highly resistance, which was this pollinizer variety. And then with the same fungicide treatments that we tested in the previous trial. So same thing, we did this in Clayton, inoculated a lot with our isolates, let it run for 8 weeks, also raised beds, white plastic mulch, and drip irrigation. Okay, so this is a much bigger graph. I know you guys love bar charts, so I made sure to put a really, really big one here in the presentation. But anyways, just to walk you through the graph, down here you have your non-treateds, right? So here you just have sort of like your resistant, your tolerant, and your susceptible with no help, right? So here you can kind of see that the resistance, it's really working as advertised, right? Like the one that was expected to have very little disease behaved that way, and this one was kind of medium, and this one was really bad. But I want to note something here. Even though host resistance is really helpful and should be your first line of defense if you can do it, if you find a variety that works for you, it's not always complete resistance, especially in a high pressure situation like what we did. So chemicals can really bring something to the table. So as far as the chemicals, the treatments we have were Proline as a drench, followed by the 2 every 14-day sprays of Proline, then Proline as a drench, followed by the 2 every 14-day sprays of adepidine as a proxy for Miravis Prime, and then same thing, adepidine as a drench, followed by the 2 sprays of Proline, adepidine as a drench, followed by 2 sprays of adepidine. Okay, so again, as you can see, it's very clear. Host resistance is just very key to reduce disease. But the other thing that we see here is that the Proline drench, or, you know, as a proxy for drip treatments, really did the best. I mean, you can see here in combination with host resistance, you essentially get nothing. It's a very, very effective treatment. So this is kind of like what we're striving for. And as far as yields, you got some really, really good yields. So just something to consider for your Fusarium wilt management. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and continue with watermelon and anthracnose and take questions at the end so that we stay within the 30 minutes. But okay, so watermelon and anthracnose. So here's a picture where you typically see. So this one is caused by a fungus called Quesada-Ocampo orbiculare. It's a fungal plant pathogen. It affects leaves, stems, petioles, and fruit. It can be transmitted by crop, residues, volunteer plants, water, and seed. This is essentially a disease that we kind of get pretty frequently, and some years is worse than others, and that's largely driven by the weather and also driven by if people were having a preventive spray within their spray program. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So for disease management, when talking about Quesada-Ocampo orbiculare, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Like in Fusarium, we have races. And we have commercial resistant varieties for those races. So again, it's worth to look at your seed companies that you like and try to find what do they have to offer about that as far as that commercial resistance, because there is quite a bit out there. Crop rotation can work, and it can be a shorter crop rotation because we're more concerned about volunteers and debris than that soil-borne nature of the pathogen, so that helps. And chemical management is just really, really key. So this is a really interesting pathogen because it's one of those that you pretty much take care of it if you have a spray of fungicides of FRAC 11 group, sorry. So if you have a FRAC 11 in your spray program, you should be okay. We have not had reported resistance to FRAC 11 fungicides in this pathogen. So it's something that we would want to know if anyone feels that that is happening. So most folks have pretty regular sprays, especially for gummy stem blight. Some of the products that we're using for gummy stem blight do not have a FRAC 11 component. So if you have good control for gummy stem blight, that is not guaranteeing that you are having good control for anthracnose. So it's really, really good idea that you pay attention, that you have a couple of spray events in your program for FRAC 11 specifically for anthracnose. And these are some of the products that would have a FRAC 11 component that you guys probably are familiar with. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about the chemical aspect because, again, it's something that through the years, it hasn't changed a lot. Even when looking at other states, I haven't looked at some South Carolina data, and it seems that FRAC 11 is the way to go. So no new information there, unfortunately. But I did want to spend a little bit of time showing you about host resistance because, again, a couple of years ago, we had some funding to do some variety trials in watermelon for anthracnose. And we really saw that there's quite a lot that works quite well. So we evaluated 36 commercial watermelon cultivars. This was done in the Cherry Research Farm a couple of years. So we had replicated data. We inoculated, again, we did raised beds, white plastic mulch, and drip irrigation. Here you have all the list of the varieties that we saw. Everything that is an open bar are seedless varieties. So as you can see, there's plenty of options for both seeded and seedless. And interestingly, my counterpart in South Carolina, Dr. Tony Kyneth, he has sustained for years that he feels that the seedless varieties tend to be less susceptible to this disease. And this was not the goal of this particular trial, but as you can see, this kind of matches with that. There's a lot of options in the seedless arena that have decent tolerance to Quesada-Ocampo orbiculare. So definitely take a look at this if you feel that you're having a lot of problems with this pathogen or that the FRAC 11 fungicide sprays are not working very well for you. And that's really all I had about us updates and just things important to cover for next growing season. I wanted to point out that, again, every single trial that we do in my lab is publicly and freely available in my lab website. There's a little tab that is called for growers, and you can find their disease fact sheets with all this information I presented. You have trials from every year that we do. So if you're interested in just seeing, okay, how is something working in North Carolina? What's the latest data on a particular fungicide, a particular crop, disease? It's right here. Alerts for diseases, things that are going down in the state, and the production guides that you guys use, like the veggie handbook, the North Carolina Ag Chem manual, all of it is here. So please use it if it's helpful. And then the extension plant pathology portal is another good one to have, mostly because it takes you to the clinic. I really encourage you to use the clinic. Both Fusarium and anthracnose can be things that sometimes people confuse with other diseases. And again, for example, in the case with anthracnose and gummy stem blight, the control options are pretty different. So it is pretty important that you are sure if you have one or the other. And same with Fusarium wilt. You don't want to confuse it with another wilt like Pythium or bacterial wilt or something like that, because the management is drastically different. So when in doubt, call out your agents. We have some really great vegetable agents, and use the clinic. Super cheap, one of the best clinics in the country. It's a good resource. And again, the production guides, all of us at NC State get together with our colleagues in the southeastern states and update all of these guidelines every year. So this is like the latest we have as far as what to spray, what's effective in all the different states. And that information is reflected in the Ag Chem manual, which you all hopefully know about. And with that, I just want to give thanks to my lab. A lot of the research I showed was actually performed by previous members that are no longer in the group, but they did a really good job with it, so I thank them. And then, of course, collaborators, our grower cooperators. I see many of you that have given me lots of letters that have helped me get the grant so I can do this research, so thank you. Our agents, of course, core facilities, especially the research stations that so kindly accommodate our disease nurseries so we can do this type of work. And of course, our many sources of funding for watermelon work.